Jay, I really appreciate you joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, yeah, and I'm glad, we've been trying to get this going for a couple months, so
Yes.
I'm glad we finally got it sorted.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And I know you've been telling me you've been just really busy the last few months and longer. What are some of the projects you've been working on?
Well, so the past, besides all the craziness that happened during pandemic and just trying to get through whatever, 2020 has been, we've been, busy with the typical like found objects stuff with my company, my music production company. But I personally have been working on a few different projects, like an experimental documentary called Light, Darkness, Light, a couple like ballet pieces, and I'm doing the second season of Modern Love on Amazon, and I'm doing the series finale of Hulu's Into the Dark. So with my good friend Emma, who's directing that one, who also directed The Wind. I'm not sure if you saw that one from Toronto Film Festival
I
2019, I
I
think.
haven't seen it. I think, shoot, I remember I wrote about it because that came out I think in mid 2019,
Yeah.
and I can't remember who did. I can't remember if it was Brian McComber or someone else.
Um,
Um,
oh, it was a guy from a band, a country. I'm like Lovett, Ben Lovett.
oh yeah, yeah, Ben
Yeah,
Lovett. That's right.
yeah,
Um, I they have like no similarities. I don't think. I just for whatever reason get them mixed up sometimes.
that's fair.
Um, but yeah, so that's great to hear, especially like mid-pandemic or maybe we're at the tail end now,
Yeah,
that you have so much on your plate. Um,
yeah,
y- you mentioned the ballet, so
yes,
that obviously lets us segue right into I'm thinking of ending things, which obviously has a big kind of ballet at the end, but
yeah.
it's also kind of stylistically some of the music that you chose to do for it. How did that choice come about?
Like why I chose to approach the ballet in the sort of stylistic way that I did.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, largely just because it falls in line with the sort of conceptual approach of the film itself. In that, like the character is sort of this sad, lonely or old man who's kind of imagining an alternative life path that he would have taken if he had had this girlfriend, and kind of all these things, and she's just a figment of his imagination, as is all of these other sort of things in his life and accomplishments and things like it references film, and it references art and literature and all these other things, and kind of takes those concepts from other artists and uses them as if he had created them, because he's sort of this person who is unfulfilled and feels like he's not living up quite to his own potential. And so in the dream sequence, in the ballet sequence, um it was all sort of in line with that, in the concept that if he's imagining his life playing out in this dramatic ballet, what type of music would he be imagining? And with that same approach, he would be appropriating from ballets that he had heard before. And since we didn't want to go and just like use something from one of them, so it was more about like appropriating their style and creating something new, but that would be so stylistically reminiscent of those composers that people wouldn't necessarily know that it wasn't actually them. So so it's very heavily influenced by Debussy and Ravel and Stravinsky, and so that was kind of the approach to that I was trying to take on that. If that makes sense.
yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I think, and I'll admit it right now, I don't really go to the ballet.
Yeah,
I'm familiar with some of the big ones, but that's it.
yeah,
And so you hear a lot of that cue throughout the score. It
yeah,
comes in the hell, it's in the trailer. It
yeah.
comes in the beginning, and then it comes in again. I don't know,
On the record player,
30
yeah,
minutes in right on the record
yeah,
player.
yeah,
And so you get those pieces of it, and then I think it's a really fulfilling moment when you're right near the end and it comes in full bore for, what feels like 10, 15 minutes, and
yeah,
every single piece just comes together. So it was a really interesting approach because normally what you're getting in film music is the progression of a theme, and sometimes it's more subtle, sometimes it's not. But I hesitate to say that that's a theme for the old man, but rather it's, I don't know, maybe it's the progression of his imagination or as things unfold to the viewer. But it was just really interesting to
Yeah.
seeing how it caught me off guard.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as sort of like rumination in a way, because he's kind of uh fixated on this um alternative narrative to his own life, and kind of circling around these ideas, and so it's this is music that he's sort of imagining playing out his life in a way in the ballet, but the entirety of the film is in his mind and his part of his imagination. So even the opening sequence that does play the love theme from the ballet, like the pas de deux, the sort of to the duet dance, is it's over an imaginary woman in a figment of his imagination talking about ending a relationship with him. So it's kind of like it's just all of these like different elements and things that he's familiar with, kind of synthesizing into this very imaginative narrative that doesn't really exist. So I think that was partially Charlie's idea to or was to put the ballet up at the top. I didn't think that was necessarily going to be the way that like what would work there, but I thought it really was quite excellent. And they actually ended up cutting that opening sequence to a degree to the way that the ballet progressed. And in the same way that they did that with the record sequence, it's kind of this crazy serendipity that it actually, like, that whole scene, kind of the structure of that scene actually does reflect the structure of the ballet as well. And so they kind of cut that scene around some of the changes in the ballet in the same way. So there were some things that I had to do to adjust to kind of make it fit exactly right, but it was still scored, even though it's playing as source, and it's supposed to be this sort of parallel narrative with what's happening on screen in that way as well. So
That's really interesting. So then when you were scoring those sequences, I mean, were you scoring to film, and then after that they kind of adjusted it and you sort of reworked it from then?
yeah, so I mean, I wrote the entire ballet before they shot. So I wrote that purely based on the description of like what was happening over the course of this narrative, right? So over the course of that ballet sequence. So he had script notes. Charlie had script notes about like all the different sequences, what was happening, who was involved, and what the sort of intent of those things were, without any choreograph to work to. I just kind of had to think about how those things would unfold in time, how much time we would need to explore each of those different states, and then create a score that was reflective of those. And so, kind of using my imagination on as to how to pace that out musically. And then we didn't really change it much. Like, I think we cut a few bars here and there for things that sequences that were a little bit too long, just based on the physical space that we were working in. And then other than that, we didn't really change anything. So that was cool. And then by the time they got into the editing room, they already had my ballet in a mock-up form. It wasn't fully recorded yet, but they were able to take that material and then start to drop it in different places and see if it worked. And so that's when they came to that. They had already shot, him putting a record on, knowing that they wanted to play the ballet there. But then once we actually tried it out in those spots, then it started to really come to life. And I think that was something that was so cool about the process working with them, is that we were finding these wonderful moments along the way. Some were very, very planned, because Charlie is very much an intentional filmmaker, but then he's also very open to finding what happens along the process and really embracing those unexpected moments.
That's really interesting. I mean, because because so often it's really the exact opposite of what you're describing, where a composer comes in and everything's already shot and they have 6 weeks to put everything together.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you get the script and you demo a couple concepts, but really there's still that mad 4, 6, 8 weeks at the end.
Yeah.
So it's really cool, and I think it comes across with just sort of how, I don't know, complex and deep the end ballet really ends up being. That
Yeah.
you had that much time to really work on it in development. So I
Yeah.
mean, that was
Yeah.
that was great.
Which is funny because, I mean, I had very little time on the upfront, right? So it was one of those things where it was actually a mad dash at the very beginning because I had to write the whole ballet in a matter of a couple weeks to get to the choreographer so that the choreographer could do the choreography and then get and casting and rehearsals and all of that stuff to then get to the point where we're actually on set with the full ballet playing over a speaker so that they can dance to it, right? So like it was sort of really fast at the front and then this like long lead time when they're starting to get into the edit or shooting and then getting into the edit, and then it was like a compressed timeline again on the back end. So it was there wasn't like once we shot, like the ballet was fixed, there was no changing the timings for what was there. Because the choreography was set and the everything is set, so that you can't really, there's not much messing around with it.
It's so weird, but
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I love it, and honestly, with something from Charlie Kaufman, like I would never expect to be like, oh yeah, that's pretty standard stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the first time I've ever experienced this. Like most of my situations, besides just like demoing themes or like exploring a sound world, there's never been up until this point a situation, at least in my film work that I'm aware of, that I've actually written something in an entire way that is finished and then just placed in the movie as part of the movie, like, which is so unique and cool and absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
And I imagine part of that too, because it's it really is this big standalone piece. That's got to be part of the reason why you want it actually released as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think I definitely want to show this to the world and have it out there. That's up to Netflix whether or not they end up doing it. But yeah, I mean, I'm really proud of it, and it was definitely a very unique challenge. And so I think it's special for that reason alone, but not up to me.
Right. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's
Yeah.
as the composer, you're in the collaborative process, and on a project like that, especially once you get into that scale, your hands are
Yeah.
tied. But I've been having my fingers crossed since whenever I watched it back in October, I think. So
Yeah.
let's hope.
Well, I did a I don't know if you saw, but I did a piano two piano version of the ballet with a good friend of mine, Tim Andres, and made a little film of him playing it, sort of overlapping himself for the Sundance Labs, like film music house. And so we released that, and we got permission to also put the ballet at least on SoundCloud. So now the ballet can be heard on SoundCloud, at least in its entirety, in its original form, as a companion piece to this video piece. So
we're getting there step by step, at least.
Yes, exactly.
It's funny because that is like such a robust piece, but then most of the film really doesn't have any noticeable music. I mean, there's a couple jingles and pieces from Oklahoma, but you basically go for the middle hour and a half. There's just nothing.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
How did you and Charlie come up with that decision?
Well, he definitely wanted it. One, he didn't want like a traditional horror score, something that was sort of just painting everything and kind of explaining what is happening on screen. Much more eerie to be, to just leave that stuff pretty dry and alone. the main sequences in the middle bit of the film that actually have stuff, is essentially, you get the film within the film,
Mhm.
the score for the film within the film. That's like the Robert Zemeckis directed, film there. And then yeah, there's like a little bit of score in the house when she like goes down into the basement. But in a way, we're kind of like treating it as like, it's kind of like going deeper into his own psyche, right? And so that space and the way that we approach that was, again, like pretty conceptual, in that that entire piece is actually still the ballet. It's still the ballet, but it's stretched out and reversed and reverbed, and so it's like it's kind of got this weird sweetness to it, but it's also eerie, and it's got these other weird textures on top of it. So the whole concept is sort of ruminating on these themes and this love theme and whatever, but kind of like it gets distorted as we go through the like different layers of his psyche and awareness of his self in a way. Yeah.
Interesting. And yeah, the idea that there's the sweetness with a, I mean, maybe a horror undertone or a menace.
Yeah.
It's so spot on, especially the when she puts on the record player and
Mhm.
the love theme starts and the harps start, and
Yeah.
it feels like what should be this just really lovely romantic moment, and it's not. There's that just underlying sense of dread and unknown,
Yeah.
and it's so bizarre to kind of process it because it's you. I mean, you recognize as the viewer, it's the exact
Yeah.
opposite of what you should be feeling or what you kind of expect.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it's funny listening to it again on its own
Yeah.
that those feelings just pop right up.
Yeah.
Listening to it without any of the film, you don't get to sit back and be like, oh, this is so lovely. It's like, oh shit, like this is not. There's something wrong here. There's something sinister going on.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it definitely it has a bit of an arc, that piece in and of itself. It doesn't stay in one sort of, it goes from that pas de deux to that sort of eerie wedding sequence to the like scene where there's that sort of conflict with the janitor and everything like that. So it kind of has all of those emotions and everything like embedded into the progression of the score itself. So it doesn't have like a singular tone, like you would necessarily score a scene like that. Um, so yeah, no, it was a very unique experience trying to, like find our way through the usage of music in this thing. And even at the end, after the ballet, essentially from the time that the ballet happens to the end of the film, it's music. So
Mhm.
that's like there are these little moments like the opening, the basement, the film within a film, the ride up to the school. There's a little bit of stuff in there, but really not a lot of score. When they leave Tulsi Town, there's a little bit, but then it's essentially the ballet to the end. So it's like 22 minutes or so where it's just music the entire time. You get the ballet, then we go out to the car and he's in the truck, and then that also is the ballet reversed and mangled, and all these elements sort of like brought together as if it's like different synapses misfiring in his head as he's like dying of hypothermia. And then we get that sort of hallucinatory, like Tulsi Town jingle that's part of the score as well, that then becomes part of the fabric as he's like following the pig down the hall, and that's backwards and mangled up and stretched out, and like, so it's all these things that are kind of getting pulled in and processed and then become part of his sort of like very distorted mental state, I guess.
Yeah, where it is, literally the audio like representation of what's going on in there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really fascinating. Is I don't know. I guess like knowing that it's reversed and mashed up and mangled and warped and all that.
Yeah.
You know, how much of like what are your expectations on the viewer and the listener? Are you thinking, okay, there's going to be like a conscious recognition or subconscious or working on these just deep layers?
I think that there's a subconscious like I think, you know, some people will dig deeper and they will recognize it. Some people won't even recognize that it's the ballet playing literally on the record, you know what I mean? But if you do pay attention, if you're a person who, you know, does dig into these things a little bit more, watches it once, twice, a third time, you start to make those connections. And I think that is the thing that is really beautiful about Charlie's filmmaking, is that there are so many details in its construction that aren't immediately recognizable, but on a second, third, fourth watch, you're like, oh my God, how did I not see this thing before? Like, it's so obvious that, you know, that this is the way that this is, because it's all very, very carefully constructed in that way, with so many different layers. And he doesn't feed it to you. He doesn't expect you to, like, you know, he doesn't show you what he's doing. He just does it, and expects that you're going to do the work to figure it out. And so I felt the same way about the score and doing that. You know, it was like, people who dig into it, if they get a chance to listen to it on its own, eventually they might start to notice it more, because, like, you know, the tonalities are similar. Like, you'll hear the chords and you'll hear the harp, but it's like, it's not the same way. You'll hear the voice from the Tulsi Town jingle. Like, you'll make that connection because the timbre is the same, and you'll be like, is that what that is? But, like, you know, so, like, being able to hear that detail, where, you know, obviously in a theater with, like, great sound and everything, you might hear. If you're watching it on a laptop, you're probably not going to hear. But if you, you know, get the score and you get to listen to it on its own on headphones, you'll I think that you will, like, people who pay attention will start to find those details and that those layers and the references as well. You know, because there's also, after the Lonely Room song from Oklahoma, you know, or I guess, wait, no, it's before the Lonely Room song in Oklahoma. You know, he kind of gives that big speech that is lifted directly from A Beautiful Mind, and the score starts to kind of take a turn into a score that might be reminiscent of Beautiful Mind. You know, it's not actually copying Beautiful Mind, but it's as if he's remembering the score to The Beautiful Mind, but it's not exact. It's inexact, right? So one of the first questions that Charlie brought up to me was like, what does the memory of music sound like? That was one of the first questions he asked me. And, you know, and I was thinking about it. I was like, well, you know, there's this certain rumination, right? Because you remember a certain part of a song, you don't remember the whole song. And, you know, if you've only heard it a couple times, or you're not a musician, like, you remember this certain part. So it's kind of like that thing on loop. In a way, you're like constantly singing that line, right? You're not singing the entirety of the song every time it comes up. You're thinking about that line, and then also you might not be doing it exactly right. You know, like, it's kind of, it's misremembering what is actually there. So to a degree, like that's kind of how the score for that moment works in a way, right? It's like, he's reciting the Beautiful Mind speech and imagining this music, but it's not the music, but it's something that's like what he would remember the music being like. So it's all very conceptual in that sort of way. Yeah.
I love that. That's great. I mean, and it's, well, and that's definitely one of the things, going back really quick, talking about when you watch it and you start to notice things. I mean, that fits right in line. You know, there are all sorts of little details. I mean, some major and some very minute, that will, you know, change scene to scene. You know, not necessarily what someone's wearing, but like one accessory will change.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is the theme that runs throughout the entire film, is just like the fallibility of memory. And it's, I don't know, it is both really interesting to me and also something that is, as a human, so deeply terrifying, because it's, I mean, it is an inevitability as well, and it's something that you don't want to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. And nothing is as you remember it, and nothing, you know, like, all your positive feelings, all your negative feelings, all of that, none of that really is it, like your reality is only how you perceive it now, you know, like like it doesn't exist in its pure form. So I think that's something that's really beautiful and interesting, and also, yeah, terrifying about the film and about life in general. And I think he did an amazing job of sort of manifesting that in a narrative structure. Like it's such an interesting, and that's why, that's why I love his films. It's like it's such an interesting intellectual challenge, and uh, really beautiful, artful way of exploring human experience in a really unique conceptual approach. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why in some ways it was a little surprising, but it's so nice to see a platform like Netflix
yeah,
sharing that because,
yeah,
the not many people have seen like Synecdoche, New York.
sure, yeah,
But then when it's out there and it's pushed and
yeah,
advertised, I mean, I
yeah,
imagine a lot of people will dislike it.
yeah.
Candidly, my wife hated that movie, but at least it's
Yeah,
there and the opportunity to experience is out there.
100%. And I totally get that. And I think, you know, I think liking and appreciating are very different things,
Yeah.
and I think that appreciation can be there for this type of movie, if even if it's people not people's um really like their type of thing, if they're interested in kind of coming to it as a bit of a challenge, and as something that is kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit. I think so much of our enjoyment and appreciation for things is expectation.
Hmm.
um, and so walking, my guess is that there were a lot of people that turn on Netflix and watch this movie with a very particular expectation of a horror film, or of a you know of some type of, or even people who are familiar with his past work, but directed by Spike Jonze or directed by Michel Gondry, where there's a little bit of a relief from the existential uh dilemmas that the characters have because of their whimsical filmmaking approach to things. But when it's like Kaufman directing Kaufman, it is oppressive in a way that, like, if you don't go into it with the right mindset, you might not be able to handle it.
Yeah. Yeah. He
And
he does
again,
not give you the release valve throughout the film to slightly
oh,
decompress before you get just
yeah,
oppressed even more.
yeah, and I love it. See, I'm a person, like, torture me, like, I love it, like, and it's challenging, but I that's the type of film I love. Is something that's a little bit more of a challenge for the audience, because I like to be an active viewer in a way. Like, sure, there's always a time for a passive watch and something that's just kind of like there to entertain. um but I feel like there's like a sense of nourishment, and not that it's like in any way comforting. Like, this movie's not comforting. It's not
Right.
gonna hold your hand, but there's a truth. I think there's some truth and some real life uh um things that it deals with, themes that it deals with, that uh can only be dealt with that are dealt with in such a unique way, that I think is important as a piece of art.
Yeah. And I'm gonna sound like a prick saying it like this,
Mhm.
but I mean there sometimes you have to go into something and think, is this actually worthwhile to watch? Am I getting anything other than an escape for an hour and a half, two
Yep.
hours? And I mean, obviously, like,
Wait, that's value.
there, yeah,
This show, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
But there are things that you will think about after you turn it off, and sometimes it's for 20 minutes talking, about it with whoever you watch it with, or sometimes it's 4 months later thinking about the impact that it had.
yeah, yeah,
I look, I'm not a complete snob. I
yeah.
love both.
Same, same. I love both, and I see value in both, and I appreciate both, and I think both are very much valid. But I very much enjoy this type of filmmaking. So I feel very, lucky to have been a part of it, and work with a director that I've admired for a long time, and such a unique experience. And if you told me I was going to have the opportunity to work with him, 5 years ago, I would have told you you're insane. So.
Yeah, and that's such a cool opportunity. When I was listening to Driveways in, I don't know,
Yeah.
early 2020, knowing that you were working on I'm Thinking of Ending Things, or that you were going to get involved in the film, I was like, oh man, this is such a good year for Jay. I mean, it's massive, and it sounds like it's at least to an extent working out like that, because you got a hell of a lot going on. I'll wrap us up, but I lied earlier. I have one really hard hitting question for you.
Okay.
I know that you're a big Philip Glass fan. So am I.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what's your favorite work of his, or some of your favorites?
Oh man. I'm gonna go with like Einstein on the Beach or Mishima, maybe. Yeah.
All right.
What's
I
yours?
I would say for film music, it's probably Koyaanisqatsi. That's one
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
put it on in the
It's so good.
background
Yeah.
and just like melt into it for 4 hours.
Yeah.
I really like Akhenaten too.
Nice.
But honestly, it's like so much good stuff.
Yeah.
So and it's the rare time where I'm glad it's like 3 hours long.
Right. Yeah. It's like this can fill up the void of all of the things that are not happening in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was lucky to get to see Einstein on the Beach when it was done here in New York, at BAM a few years back, which was really great, because my business partner Trevor Grekus worked with him for 6 years, and we kind of came up through his studio in a way. I did some like copy edit work for him back in the day, but most of my time was spent like orchestrating for Rufus Wainwright, sort of in those years, because we were both kind of working out of that studio. Like our company was renting that Phillips space as we were kind of getting our feet on the ground, and so that's where we would have working sessions with directors or artists when we were trying to kind of get our feet on the ground. So
I mean, that's
day.
an awesome opportunity. I'd love to chat with you, and with Trevor,
Yeah.
who's another great young composer too.
Yeah.
Just I'd feel bad because I just want to ask you guys about Philip Glass, but
he'll have, I'm sure he'll have some great stories. Philip came to his wedding, which was a lot of fun at Le Poisson Rouge here in New York, like sort of an underground, a new music venue. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, Trevor spent a lot of time with him over the years, and so he definitely would have some great stories for you. So I definitely recommend chatting with him.
All right, I will. And it's obviously worked well for him. I mean, the Goldfinch, I think, came out in 2019. I mean, he had a great score for that.
Yeah. And he's got Servant, that season 2 just came out, and next week he'll be starting M. Night Shyamalan's new feature, Old.
Oh wow!
So yeah, so he's got that going on. So that'll be an exciting one between like now and March or so. So yeah, we're grateful to be keeping busy and doing things we love, and working with some really great filmmakers. Like we're very lucky to have had the opportunities we've had, and work with the people we had who've really supported us and given us some cool opportunities. So
that's awesome. And obviously I'm looking forward to this whole slate of what you've got working on coming out over the next however many months.
Yeah, well, thanks, man. I appreciate it, and thanks so much for having me. I appreciate
it. Yeah, and thanks so much for joining me. I'm glad that you could carve out some time for me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, bud.
All right.
All right, man.
See ya.